Hey, what's up everybody? My name's Yuri and welcome to ROH Cycling. Today, we're going to be talking about intensity factor. If you need a bit of a refresher on training stress score or normalized power, feel free to click one of these links. So let's jump into Training Peaks just to see where we can find this metrics and make some sense of a couple of ride files. All right, so we are in Training Peaks, and what you're going to want to do is click on the calendar view, which is going to take us here. You're then going to click on a specific date. A lot of the metrics pop up here, including IF, it's right here. But if you click the Analyze button, you'll be able to select certain segments or the entire ride and look at the IF of that. So we're just going to scroll down to the actual ride here. Here you can see the ride. We have the ride itself. This was just an endurance ride performed on a trainer. You can see here the IF is 0.68. And what the IF really represents is the intensity factor. So it's a percent of your FTP. So for this ride here that I performed, it's saying that for the total ride, the IF is about 68%. But I could also highlight and select certain segments of it, and it'll give me potentially a different number. Again, this was endurance ride, so like 99% of it's in one zone. But if I highlight this little segment over here, maybe the couple of 6 minutes or so above that intensity, it'll say there, the IF is now 76%. And remember, IF, just like TSS, uses normalized power and not average power in the workout. As always, we're going to do a little deep dive into Excel, but again, IF is very simple. It's not very technical, but I still think it's important to look at regardless. All right, so we are now in Excel looking at the formula here. You can see our previous videos. We got our TSS, normalized power, and a couple of other rides there. And now we are on to IF. So IF, or intensity factor, is just your normalized power divided by FTP. And that's it. So you can see here, I have entered a normalized power of 306 watts. And again, that's going to be over my FTP power, which is why the IF, or intensity factor, says 1.2 is 120% of my FTP. Now, if I change the normalized power to exactly what my FTP is, we will get a 1, because that'll be 100%. 127 normalized power will show us a IF of 0.5 or 50%. 191 normalized power will be 75. We already discussed that 255 would be 1. And then again, we gave an example of 306 being 120% of FTP. There are instances where riders are able to hold an IF of greater than 1 for an hour or longer, which, if you think about it, would suggest that you're holding over FTP power. But since FTP by definition is the longest power you can hold for a long period of time without fatigue, whether or not that is 40 minutes or an hour for you or slightly longer, that's another subject matter. But in most cases, people are well aware that their FTP is between that 40 to 60 minute marker. In our next example, we're going to look at a race I did earlier in the year. All right, so we are back in Training Peaks. I'm going to take a look at the actual ride file. So already here, if we look at this road race I did here on June 18th, before we even click it, you can see here the IF is listed. It's giving me 0.98 IF for 2 hours and 5 minutes. So you can tell already things are looking a little bit weird. You'll also notice that the TSS is high. So it's 200 TSS. It's almost 100 TSS points per hour. And by definition, if you're riding at 100 TSS for an hour, that basically means you're riding at FTP for 1 hour. And we know you cannot hold your FTP for 2 hours. So some of you may be looking at this and saying like, oh, this sort of looks like, like you just didn't have your zone set correctly. Like something's got to be wrong. But no, this happens quite a bit. This does make sense, especially given that we have to remember in the earlier video where I talked about normalized power, we talked about how it was calculated, how there's a 30-second rolling average, and that 30-second rolling average, the numbers are taken to the fourth powers. The bigger the number, the bigger it becomes. We're gonna pretty much unhighlight everything other than power, because that's all we really need to see here. And again, this is smoothing. I'm not sure if a lot of you know. If you ever go on like Strava or certain apps, they will show you power like this, like it's some sort of like smooth, like very steady. It's never like that. The reality is a lot of software just adds smoothing to it, so it's showing you not the reality. This was the reality. There's a lot of high power efforts here. And again, we can already see the IF is basically 1.02 here for the entire duration. And if we highlight we'll take this segment here, maybe to here, where there's like a lot of stuff going on, and that should be maybe an hour. It's a little bit longer. My FTP was realistically 270 watts at the time. My normalized power is 290. And if we actually look at the average power, this gives us like a pretty good indicator. Like the average power, yeah, it's really low. But if I was to go out and ride 236 watts, I could do that no problem. But because of all these high powered efforts being factored into the normalized power calculation, all of a sudden the true physiological cost of my body was as if I could ride 290 watts. Yes, it is possible to get an IF of over 1 for extended periods of time. I'm sure if we actually highlight even here to here, where like most of the effort's going, this is actually where I got dropped on side trombone. I kind of rode in solo. That's okay. Happens all the time. You can still see there's an hour 20 and the IF is still 1.08 or 291. And again, my FTP is like 270 watts. So it is what it is. There are many different types of athletes, and depending on who you are, generally, I would say, but not always, riders with very high sprint ability and anaerobic power are capable of generally getting higher NPs than their average power. So what I mean by that is if I try to hold 300 watts steady right now, if I just hopped on a trainer or outdoors, I might be able to do like 300 watts for like 10 to 15 minutes. And then I would be toast. Like there's no way I can hold 300 watts steady. But if you give me the opportunity to go way above 300, recover, and then keep doing maximal efforts like that, because of how the calculations are using normalized power to derive these metrics, I am actually able to blow these numbers out. So it doesn't mean my FTP is 300. I've seen in many instances where people say you can use normalized power as a proxy for FTP. That may or may not be true for you, depending on what kind of athlete you are. Like, if you are a time trialist, then for sure, I would say that's acceptable. But for people with huge anaerobic contributions and high muscular force and are capable of repeated efforts, you can really blow the water. For instance, because my FTP is so low relative to my max sprint, I'm actually able to sprint at 600% of my FTP. Whereas if you take someone like a pursuiter or a time trialist, they may only be able to get like 200-300% of their FTP. And again, since the way normalized power is calculated and all that, etc., it really skews my data. So a lot of crit racers can get very high normalized power values, and therefore they will get very high IF values. But as I mentioned earlier, if you ask these riders to ride that effort at a steady state, chances are it might only last 10 to 15 minutes, maybe slightly longer. But again, everyone's going to be a little bit different. The reason I created this series and going into a little depth is to give you, the viewer at home, a little bit more explanation. There are a lot of metrics, and it's important to know that all metrics have their limitations. So hopefully by now I've done a half decent job of explaining to you at least TSS, normalized power, and now intensity factor, and some of the sort of quirks you can get with any of these metrics. In my case, I'm one of these riders that are able to a very high normalized power. All right, and now it's going to be a bonus of a little video. I'm just throwing in here an easier way to calculate TSS, a little simplified version. So we're going to jump back into Excel. We are back at TSS. We've written out the original formula, and now we have a simplified formula. So we have TSS simplified, IF multiplied by times in hours multiplied by 100. What that means is you're going to take an IF, multiply it by itself, and then multiply that by hours, multiply by 100, and we should get the same value. So over here, we can see the IF. Let's change this to 0.5. We have 1 hour gives us 25 TSS, the simplified. We're going to take our IF, change that to 0.5. 1 hour times 100, we get 25. So the TSS is the same. We can also do this like let's do 2 hours. So you can see we also have 2 hours here. So 2 hours is 7,200 seconds. So we have the TSS. And you know, we can, again, if you're a normalized power buster, you can put 1.02 for 2 hours and you'll get 208 TSS, kind of close to what I got in my road race there. Same thing here. We got multiplied by 2, IF 1.02, and blammy, 208. So again, normalized power buster for 2 hours, possible. A use case for this simplified TSS calculation, if you're at a gym, sometimes there's like spin bikes or you're traveling and you might have your equipment or a head unit with you, but you know, you're riding and you realize, oh, the device I'm using uses watts. If you just track the average, or at least if it gives you an average, I know sometimes it's just instantaneous, or if you really stay laser focused and perhaps you ride for any amount of time right on the cusp of that power target, you can literally use this formula. If you know what your FTP is, you know the power you rode at for a time duration, you can use the simple formula to calculate TSS and you could go home. Now, the issue with that is, that the watts being displayed on some of these spin bikes may not feel like the 200 watts you're used to on your other bike, and plus you're on clip-ins, etc. It'll actually feel harder. But another thing is, let's say you're riding and you just want to say, hey, I'm gonna go for 2 hours or an hour, or any time duration for that matter. You can say, hey, I'm gonna ride at this intensity. You can calculate, and you'll know by the end of the ride, give or take within a couple of TSS, you should have a fairly accurate number. Now, obviously, this isn't calculating if you're doing sprints or hard efforts or anything. This is just like steady Freddy. You pin it to that intensity, start to finish. It gives you a good estimation and good idea of what you're gonna do on that particular day. So I thought I'd include that there. So again, going to make just a shout out to the previous videos I've created. I got a video about TSS, normalized power, and now IF. And as always, it is greatly appreciated if you like, comment, and subscribe. It is of no cost to you whatsoever, but it does help me out tremendously, and I greatly appreciate it. As well as feel free to share this with your cycling buddies. If you have any suggestions for my next video, please put it in the comment section, and I'll do my best to address it. All right, I think that covers intensity factor. I'm up.